Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I think Dominic's going to be the prize. Yep, Dominic wins the prize for the first to type something. Congratulations, mate. Well done.
Yeah, Dominic's
Thanks
waiting.
for coming in. That's it. All good, all good. Hope everyone is well this evening. Again, we'll give it a minute or two just to allow everyone to dial in, and we'll kick off. Hope everyone is well. I suppose I may as well get the question out of the way first before we start tonight. Is what was people's thoughts on the sudden death at the Diamond League at the weekend in Stockholm? The last three getting, or the top three getting 3 final jumps. Any comments on that out there? Which is barrage of text. Assuming that some people actually watched it. Absolutely not good. Very polite way of putting it. Sudden death joke. Yeah, it was interesting.
The silly thing is, Darren, is that they say they consult athletes and stuff like that, but I was speaking to Abigail, and Abigail can't find any athlete that they've consulted on it.
Yeah, I think the whole idea was to make it more entertaining, but we never actually saw any coverage really of the first 5 rounds, and there were no spectators in the crowd.
There were no spectators there,
yeah.
no. Yeah, and again, and that's the falsehood of it all, isn't it? Because they've often talked about, in times gone by, it was, television time and stuff like that. And we said, right, what television time? Because you still only show the highlights. So it's not taking up any more time on TV or anything like that. But
yeah, cool. All right, we'll give it one more minute and then we're going to crack on. We do have, as usual, a full program. And hopefully it's not death by PowerPoint. But yeah, cool. Good. We did do that for javelin and hammer. Well, there was discus on it the weekend, but they never cut that. Good evening. So, yeah.
Is it just the jumps that they're doing that for at the moment then?
Yeah, I think so.
No.
I think so. Well, certainly on
so
Sunday
we've been experimented on it.
Yeah. Well, the men's long jump, the second person won it.
Yeah.
At least in the women's, the girl who jumped the furthest won it, but third came second. And
in the men event, I hear that he spent the rest of the evening apologizing to the guy who actually did win.
Yeah, I know. Crazy. I'm sorry, but I won all the money, but I shouldn't have.
Yes.
I bet he didn't hand that money over.
I'm sure he didn't do that.
No, absolutely not. All right, well, listen, we've got a few more people expected to come in, but I'm going to kick off anyways. Listen, guys, good evening. Thanks for signing up to tonight's presentation on runway development in long and triple jump. My name is Darren Ritchie. I am the event group lead for jumps and combined events for England Athletics, and delivering with me this evening is Aston Moore.
Hi everyone. Hey?
No, on you go, mate. Sorry.
No. I wasn't even sure whether they're going to say. Yeah, so as Darren said, my name is Aston Moore, and I'm the senior national performance coach for British Athletics for horizontal jumps, and I'm just going to pipe in whenever I think that I need to pipe in. Other than that, this is Darren's show.
Oh, okay, no pressure then, mate. Try not to correct me too often, okay? All right, well, let's go then. Let's kick off. All right, so as I mentioned, this is about coaching horizontal jumps, runway development, and this is part of the series that we've pulled together. For those who were there, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, Aston, it was yourself and Frank kind of introduced the overview of triple jump, and prior to that, it was myself and Frank looked at the long jump. So this is a continuation. We're bringing the long and the triple jump together for this one, and again we'll separate out for the next series. As really with everything, we talk about these 4 pillars, these 4 key factors in terms of athlete development, and within our coaching practice, we want to see elements of this programmed and planned within a program. How are we developing the technical, tactical, the physical, and the mental behavioural within our coaching? And through the course of the next 40 minutes, not 90 minutes, the next 40 minutes, We will hope to address on most of these, some in more detail than others, but yeah, touching on each of those elements for developing horizontal jumpers. So tonight we're focused on runway development and horizontal jumps, and really the introduction of this is the objective is to achieve a maximum controllable speed. So this is the optimum speed that enables the athlete to jump to generate that vertical lift. Okay, and what the characteristics of that approach are, depending on the developmental level of the athlete. From beginners, that could be as short as 10 strides, and for more elite athletes, it can be up to 20 or perhaps 22 strides, depending on the individual. Generally, we want to see speed increasing continually leading into the takeoff. Pretty straightforward. But the key thing is the run-up has a unique rhythm to it. The rhythm, when we talk about optimum speed and maximum velocity execution down the runway, there's a rhythm to it. And that rhythm is different to what you would perhaps see in a 60-meter sprint in an individual athlete, where again, they're still running at maximum velocity, but it's a different rhythm. So, but regardless of some of the differences we see in the rate of acceleration, almost all top jumpers reach their maximum takeoff speed in those penultimate strides coming into the board, which is essential for effective, powerful, fast takeoffs. In terms of the structure, there are generally 3 phases in this. And these are described as the acceleration or drive phase. And again, this could be anything between 4 and 6 steps, and this depends on the individual. And there's a period of slow rhythm. Again, those slow, long foot contacts, big strides, with the body angle starting to increase as we get into the upright running position. The alignment or the continuation phase is a period of upright posture where we see more vertical force displacement into the ground with that increased frequency coming into the board. And this transition phase, this attack phase coming into those last 4 steps, is that period where the athlete accelerates into the takeoff for there. In terms of length, there are a number of factors that dictate length for the athlete, and it's a moving target. And I suppose the term is often used as it depends, and depends on a number of consideration factors. The jumper's experience could be a consideration factor. How long they've been in the sport, they've been doing the event, for example. Their age and stage of development can have a determining factor. Their sprinting technique. Yeah, so their mechanics coming in could have an effect on that length, and their ability to hold that technique as well. And everything that underpins all that is the physical conditioning. So we know that the athletes need to be physically conditioned and competent to underpin the technical model that we want to see. And then their coordination capacity to accelerate and get up to speed. In terms of the length, the approach run, the longer the approach run, the greater number of strides, the increase in the risk of chance of, or increase in the difficulty to get that consistent stride pattern. So, so that's certainly for those who've got 20 to 22 strides. Lots of repetition is required to make sure we've got that consistent stride pattern there. And therefore, we see that for beginner jumpers, developing athletes, we should be looking at a shorter approach so we can get some consistency. And as they develop, in their experience, they improve their sprinting mechanics, they get stronger through an effective physical preparation program. We can actually start evolving that approach length based on what we see. And it's very important that we use our coach and eye, our observation skills, to be able to make those interventions. So to sum up, appropriate distance for each individual jumper is really according to their ability at this stage.
I mean, one of the key things as well, Darren, to actually sort of maybe try and get the length right is when you look at different athletes and at different ages or different abilities, it's their ability, how long it takes them to get to maximum speed. Yeah, sometimes that gives you an indication of just how long that runway needs to be then. Yeah, and certainly the younger athletes will always get to they will very quickly get up to maximum speed. So therefore, taking them any further out than that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we could see that sometimes when athletes getting up to speed and then they're actually decelerating and slowing down before they get to the board, and you go, well, you know, where's the rationale on that? But no, absolutely, mate.
Yeah, and of course the opposing one to that is Carl Lewis, then, who runs 100 meters very, very quickly. His runway was about 50 meters.
Yeah, absolutely. How many Carl Lewises are out there today?
And not very many.
Not many.
If at all.
Cool. All right. So, so what does that look like in terms of, here's a typical example of how a run-up can change during a jumper's career in the long or the triple jump. So at a youth under 18, we can see that they can have an approach length of 12 to 14 strides. And again, this depends on their training age and that as well. But as a junior, we can see 16, 18 to 20, and then see what those physical characteristics we can see and their abilities. So if we're looking at, as a youth, running 12.3, we'd be looking at that approach length of 12 to 14 strides, and we would expect to see them jumping around that 6 meter mark. Right through to senior, where if you're running 10.7 for 100, you're probably looking at that 18 to 20 strides, and we're looking at athletes who are jumping that 750 to 770 mark. And then we've got that representation. What does that look like in terms of length and meterage there? So just a typical example of what that might look like for an athlete going through their career on that. So we introduced this deterministic model for long jump at the first presentation for this, and Aston presented a similar model that kind of reflects for both long and triple jump. But the focus for this evening is certainly going to be looking at the accuracy at takeoff, which can have a direct impact on the takeoff distance, and looking at the velocity. And we'll look at how we train and develop horizontal velocity specifically tonight. And we know that horizontal velocity is a component of the resultant velocity at takeoff, which is a combination of the horizontal and vertical velocity. We will look at generating how we generate vertical velocity in the next presentation for the long jump, where we talk about the penultimate and the takeoff. And looking at the different strategies of generating that vertical lift and bringing that all together. So certainly tonight we will talk about athletes coming into the board, but we won't focus on penultimate until the next session. Okay, so here is a diagram of an example of a diagram that's been plotting approach speed against official distance. So approach speed would be along the bottom, and that would go from 0 meters per second right through to 11 or 12 meters per second. And at the bottom on the left axis, that will be 0 centimeters, 0 meters up to 8-9 meters. And when we plot this data out, we can see that there are different types of athletes will cluster or typically sit at different points along these lines. So if you look at the athlete 3, which is the triangle, they would be speed dominant. So they're sitting below the average that we from the data collected. Athlete 2, who's that square and dots represented above the line, they will be strength dominant athletes. And then athlete 1 is kind of sits in the middle in that mean point. So why is this information important for us? Well, we can look at qualities and attributes that relates to performance, and this is a correlation to that. But it also tells us two further things: the type of athlete you're working with. So is a strength athlete versus a speed dominant athlete, and that may inform you on how to develop your athlete. So Aston was talking about how he coached Phillips Adubu. When Phillips was still running 10.5 meters per second down the runway, but you would probably still base him as a strength dominant athlete, and therefore you would train him as such. Would that be fair, Aston?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I mean, knowing that the information here, you either play to the strength, or if you find that it's a weakness for the athlete, then you actually then have to strengthen the weakness. Yeah, and so for me, right, the graph helps you to mix what needs to be mixed. So if you have a speed-related athlete, but they're not jumping particularly far, then you know that you need to build some strength into that.
Yeah.
If you have a strength-dominant athlete and they're not jumping far, then you need to build some speed in. If you have a strength-dominant jumper but jumping a long way as well, you go yippee and keep working whatever you're working.
Yeah, you don't want to mess with that.
No.
No. Okay, cool. Hope that makes sense. Fire questions to us if you're looking for any further clarification. So in terms of run-up velocity, we've kind of both in our previous presentations looked at some examples of some of the data, but what over 10 years of data tells us is this, and this is based on average of the top three in each of the championships over the last 10, 11 years, is that in the men's long jump, they're running between 10.5 and 11 meters per second. And that 11 meters per second has typically been like Dwight Phillips, who kind of skews the stats a little bit. And in the women, 9.3 to 9.5. And the triple jump, it's still 10.2 and 10.3, although some will drop just around low, like 10 flat on that. And in women's triple, 9 to 9.3. But what this tells us is that you need to be running extremely fast, or the ability to run extremely fast to jump far. And if we're looking at these are, if we talk about going back to the earlier slides, talking about this is optimum velocity, this is not maximum velocity. These are athletes running down at their optimum velocity that enables them to generate that takeoff, that generate that vertical lift or that transition off the into the hop. So in long jump, what we see is approximately, in terms of efficiency, athletes are hitting about 9 to 8% of their maximum speed, their capacity to run. And in triple jump, it's approximately 97%. So we're not talking about having the ability to run 10.5 meters per second. We need athletes to be able to have the ability to run 10.5 meters per second down a runway in control and be able to generate that vertical lift.
Good point.
So, yeah. So, and it's the same with the triple jump. So, where we talked about, in the women's long jump running, so in the women's sprints, the girls who can run 11.5, 11.4, 11.5. That's the kind of speeds that we're talking about. If you look at Britain's Lorraine Ugan, she's recording times velocities similar to what we're seeing here on this slide, and she's running what, 11.3, 11.2, 11.3
about that, yeah,
in the 100. So yeah, from again, the point I'm making is we need to kind of look at the types of athletes that can jump these distances and what are those qualities. So kind of tongue in cheek is some sprint coaches out there saying, how many long jumpers have you got on your stable? But yeah, cool.
I mean, just to add to that a little bit, Darren, just so that I know some people have the question as, are long jumpers because they're faster than triple jumpers per se, and that's not necessarily so, although it could very well be the case. And a good friend of mine, Frank Hatto, puts it this way. I mean, when he was asked the question, was that when you look at a jumper who does both long and triple jump, at a high level, you will normally find that when they do the long jump, the approach speeds are faster than when they triple jump, and that's only because the triple jump demands a little bit more control than long jump takeoffs, and that's primarily the reasons why one will be slightly slower than the other.
Joe has posed the question, is the 6 to 1 meter average velocity, or is this maximum velocity on the runway? Good question.
It's generally 6 to 1, isn't it?
Yeah, generally 6 to 1. The data over the years, the data has been presented in different ways. I think it's been presented looking at 10 meters leading into the board, so 11 to 6, and then 6 to 1. And the key difference we want to see is a quicker velocity in that second distance, which would suggest that the athlete's accelerating in. However, if the speed is slower from 6 to 1 than 11 to 6, it would suggest that they've decelerated and prepared too much for the takeoff. And then more recently, the data they've looked at points on the third last, second last, and last stride coming in, and now we're starting to see more and more data, more information coming to us. And I think looking at additional data that we're seeing is using the Lavi gun, the laser gun. They're actually giving us distances at which point down the runway that they're actually achieving their maximum speed. So that could be anything from 3 meters to 8 meters back, 10 meters back. So again, this is all just information that we can take that informs our programming going forward on that. Okay, happy with that?
Yep.
Okay, I'm conscious of time on that. So that kind of really sets the scene. So for me, it's kind of just looking at it from a technical perspective. What does this look like now? And what I want to do is just cover some biomechanical concepts on this when we talk about this. When we're overcoming inertia, we need to generate a great amount of force to move that mass. Force is mass times acceleration. So we want to see some pushing behind the center of mass, which causes that forward movement, but we also generate some forward rotation with that. And therefore, we need to counter that with big arm actions. If we see athletes, and we'll see some videos shortly, athletes accelerating with big arm action to counter that rotation and help generate that force forward. And we want to see a really aggressive drive of that free knee coming through to support that. During those initial strides, we can see in that diagram at the bottom, the path of that foot, of that heel, and we see a green line represented with a tick to say this is the path we want to see. We don't want to see, as soon as we get toe off, as the toe leaves the ground, under acceleration, that heel coming around in a big high movement, because it's just not the quickest path, essentially. And so from a coach's perspective, some cues that you could use is looking at that piston action, or you know, there's lots of discussion around dragging the toes around the ground or sweeping the toes across the ground.
No need. We're not sprinters.
No, absolutely. But I think it's a coaching cue that kind of elicits a response. And if it works for the athlete and you get the response that you want, then great. And then in one on the right, we talk about once we've kind of finished that acceleration phase, we now transition into the upright phase. And once we've reached the speed that we want, it's very much that vertical. We want to be hitting the ground from above, and it's more about vertical forces there. And so the qualities that we want to see in that are different from the start, and we'll explain that shortly. So to continue with that, again, principles are the same, although this is coming out of blocks. The principles are the same at the start. We want to see this kind of nice, great angle, that straight angle from the heel all the way through to the head, nice straight as the force apply force into the ground. We see a high rate of change of velocity, and to achieve that, we need a large horizontal component. Once we're up into running, it's more about vertical component. Where there's zero acceleration happening, we're now up into speed. And then the final one is just illustrated this. Again, is looking at each stride. We want to see an increase in angles from the shin angle to trunk angle. And so the drive phase is finished essentially when the shin angle hits 90 degrees. There's a transition phase when we're talking about sprinting. That's a period where the trunk goes from an angle to upright. And when both shin and trunk are upright, that's when we're in that full upright phase. And we can see at the bottom there some coaching cues and stuff that we want to see. Again, it's looking at the positive arm action to help with the coordination of all that and maintaining that posture. The key thing is making sure that the pelvis is neutral once we're upright and running, because that has a direct impact on the mechanics in the lower limb. Okay, so some concepts behind. So here's a few images from Jeff Henderson, which looks at some of the key positions we want to see that we've just illustrated from the biomechanical concepts. And we can see at figure 2 there, we've got a really nice, great straight line. And for me, the arm action reflects the leg action, and we can see that with the left arm reflecting the right knee and vice versa. When we strike, we want to strike down just in front of the hips or just underneath the hips, but it'll be probably just in front. But again, it's a cue. We want to be striking underneath the hips and getting that acceleration coming out. So I think we've got a couple of videos coming up, people you may have seen before or heard of. We've got Greg Rutherford here. I've got real time, and then I've got some stuff in slow motion, which can hopefully illustrate some of the points. Okay, so I'm going to replay that one again once more. And again, hopefully we can see some of those positions that we saw previously in that diagram. Let's go back to the start with this. So this one is, I think, 10% speed, so we can see things a little bit clearer now. So we've got a bit of a rock back, but the right foot is still fixed. And we have different styles of people starting, which we can look at. Where we can see the extension, striking that foot underneath the center of mass. We've got that big arm action to counterbalance that forward rotation. And we can see that knee picking up. Now we've started to see that heel and the thigh closing to increase the speed of that free leg coming through. But the key thing is the knee position is striking the ground from above, which sets us up for the upright position. Yeah. Any comments on that, Aston? You get yourself a mute, mate. We'll move on. We'll move on. The other one I've got is Spanovich, and I really like what she does. It's different to what we've just seen with Jeff and with Greg. Again, very aggressive, very powerful, very slow rhythm, but slightly different. And again, coming in. I'll play that once more. Can anyone tell the difference between the two? 5 points for the first person to reply. Okay. I'll go through this in slow motion and we can see this. So there are certain things that we're seeing. We're seeing that long extension, that huge horizontal displacement through the horizontal alternate bounds that she's carrying out at the start. We're seeing the path of the foot low. We get a low heel carry on those initial strides. I'll play that again. But we can see as she steps forward, that left foot, she steps forward from that point she was at. Now in this particular video, I think she actually fouls the first round. So there's some.
But we can see why.
So there's some inconsistencies creeping in there. But yeah, we can see just the whole power and aggressiveness and the explosiveness that she comes from the start just sets her up so well. And I think this the indoor season she jumped like 7:24 that year. A great illustration of being able to yeah, accelerate. Next one. So we've got so I jumped there. We've got, I think, a couple of other videos that I've kind of picked up recently. This is Zongo, who jumped 1730, 1740 recently. Interesting start here. You think this looks positive? Got a fixed foot, and then does yeah, that. So we've got different styles. We have different styles to how athletes start. This is Teddy Tango. This is 2011 in Paris, the European indoors, where he jumps the world record, jumps 1792. I think he actually done it twice in the competition. But again, is this something you would want to coach? I'm not sure that's consistent enough, but it's effective. He's jumping nearly 80 meters. And I want to play that once more because you can see towards the end we talk about steering, where we've got this kind of opening stride, and then the last couple of strides he's really having to check and really adjust his stride pattern and rhythm to get into that. So there's really huge effective steering mechanisms going on in there. Okay,
Just a
so
second, Darren. I mean, I'm not actually seeing any. It could be that it's my network that's slow, but I'm not actually seeing any of the
videos
stuff you're showing right now.
Okay, can I do a sense check? Is anybody seeing these videos? Anyone out there? Works for me. Video's okay. It must be you, Aston.
Okay, it's good. It's my end then. Okay,
that's fine. Okay, let's. I'll throw that once more because it's impressive. Again, those just last 4 strides coming in, and we can see that steering going on. Okay, so how are we doing for time? We're halfway, and yeah, I need to push on. Okay, let's crack on. So upright running. So upright running or continuation phase. It's that transition from pushing to more of a cyclical action. So rather than that low and sweeping going on. At ground contact, we want to see the support leg, shin and trunk hitting approximately 90 degrees, and we can see that in figure 10. And where we see the free knee next to the support knee coming through. So if we look at figure 6, we can see the toe just coming off the ground. So on Rojas's right leg, the toe's just coming off. So we call that toe off. So as soon as we get toe off, we want to be seeing the acceleration of that knee and the flexion of the hip coming through. So we can see that in figure 7, that knee's flexed and it's now coming through. That's going to enable for that free knee to come through earlier and to get that classic 4 position that we want to see. When we do that, that helps reduce the ground contact time as well, and gets ready to apply force into the next ground and into the next stride. And throughout, we want to see him maintain that neutral posture, that neutral head, relaxed shoulders, and upright position throughout. So, again, I've got a couple of videos just to illustrate these points. And we've got one long, one triple jump. And I want us to think about the rhythm, or have a look at the rhythm when we're looking at this stuff as well. Any thoughts on the rhythm? You know, what was that build up and that speed like coming into the runway? What does that look like? We want to see that smooth acceleration as the athlete speeds up and kind of accelerates, and we've got this huge, you can see the intensity and the intent of the athlete coming through into takeoff. And let's have a look at Taylor on this one. Christian Taylor, I think he was sitting second or something at the time on this one, behind Clay. It just meant business.
And you can also see the definite almost with Taylor being just a little bit more patient, a little bit more controlled with the speed as he enters the takeoff.
But yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. And for me, when I was looking at this, it's how silent and quiet his body is through the phases. And I know we're not talking about this tonight, but just the whole balance and how quiet his trunk is going through and his body through that is just awesome. Okay, cool. So let's crack on. So hopefully we've covered some of that. In terms of accuracy and consistency, this was mentioned in Ashton's presentation previously, where athletes have actually lost out on medals and positions due to accuracy and consistency, and that is really key when we're developing that approach, is making sure that we maximize those 20 centimeters onto the board and obviously not go beyond it. But we can see here that Burks in the 2018 World Indoor Championships lost nearly 14 centimeters at takeoff. So she was only 5.5 centimeters onto the board. So if you actually look at her effective distance, she jumped 681, but her effective distance was almost 695, which would have placed her third. And if we look at Denny and Lawson on the right in the long jump, again, Denny was 1 centimeter from the plasticine, so he maximized everything out of it, but Lawson lost an out by nearly 10 centimeters. So we can see here that these guys missed out on medals and prize money as a result of not being as accurate or as efficient on the runway as it could have been. So accuracy and consistency is really important. Some of the observed faults that we see in this, athletes, we talked about this at the start, is athletes actually fail to develop that maximum speed or actually slow down before the takeoff. Steering issues, so they either overstride coming in or chop their strides too much, which then can have that negative effect in terms of velocity. Inconsistent rhythm and inconsistent run-up structure. Again, if consistency is key, and it's what it's important to get that repetition in within the program over the span of the athlete's career as they develop, is to continue to develop that rhythm, so that it's so familiar with them. And so inconsistent rhythm is accelerating too fast and not having any rhythm, or they're decelerating coming into the board from one round to the next, that it just changes. So they're having that inconsistent and inconsistent run-up structure, the same thing. So and again, it's worse when the athlete fouls, where they go all out in the first round and then they get a safe one in the second, but then because they've not got the same rhythm or the same structure, they're either fouling again or they're short of the board, and all of a sudden they're now in a pressure situation in round 3 where they need to put a mark in to qualify, and therefore we may see further inconsistencies at that point. And it's even worse if you're on you go.
No, I was going to say, see, you're seeing situations where, athletes are in the shape of their lives. Probably they're the leading athletes of the day, and because of the pressures, a lot of these inconsistencies that you talk about, right, creeps in, and they foul out the competition, even though they were probably favorites. So they're not, even the most experienced athletes not immune to some of these things.
I mean, and this is where the mental behavioral piece comes in. I mean, I remember in 1995, which was not yesterday, but I went to Birmingham for the British Championship, so the 3 years at the time, and that was my first ever experience. 3 no jumps. I just, the whole situation overwhelmed me. So from a mental behavioral piece, my legs were jelly, no 3 no jumps, done, so and I had recognized that and had to learn from that. So yeah. So in terms of kind of things that we can consider, or things we can look at within our programming and within our practice, using a simple unchanged position from the start of the run-up. We have seen 4 different styles tonight from athletes, but I think the key thing is don't make it complicated. A hop and a skip and a walk and a run and a jump. There are so many variables that can affect the athlete. Do you need that stress? So we're really looking at consistency in those initial strides. Coming into the board, a check mark can be used in the same way that pole vaulters use a midpoint, but that's primarily for the coach. I think for horizontal jumps, we can look at perhaps a check mark 4 strides out. But again, that's very much should be for the coach and not for the athlete to start looking down and to see if they've made that mark or not. Because if they're over, what are they going to do? Are they going to stop running and then start the runway again? So, but the check mark could be a reminder for the athlete to do something to attack into that board. I think we need to pay attention to the external factors that can make those changes, whether it's the wind, the track surface. I think internal factors as well in terms of adrenaline. You were winning the competition, your competitor right in front of you has just jumped a centimetre further than you. you know, so you're up for it, the adrenaline, all that kind of stuff. So you need to consider and be mindful of these changes, attempting to concentrate, not only through the competitions, but also in the full run-ups and training. I think that's really important. And we see many athletes, whether they're on the runway or certainly prior to, you know, preparing to compete, they use mental imagery. Remember Mike Powell talking about running like a deer prancing down the runway, you know, so using that kind of visual imagery to visualize himself running down the runway. I think for me, some of the observations I see is we see an inconsistent in the process and the warm-up for competition, but also the preparation between rounds. We can often see athletes just sitting between one round to the next, and they've done this big full warm-up and feeling great, and then all of a sudden they drop their core temperature, they sit between rounds. So I think it's important to have an effective process and a consistent process that prepares them for the competition, but also what they do prior to rounds. So I would always look at and suggest to the athletes that I coach, look at maybe the 5th athlete in order before you, to know to get your kit off, do a stride, and start getting mentally prepared for the next attempt. And some steering, you know, looking at steering skills within your session, looking at wicket runs, and we'll talk about that shortly, but running over small mini hurdles, but changing the spacing, perhaps over a 20-meter distance in total, where athletes have to learn to coordinate their running action to be able to adjust to the change in wicket spacings. And a coach could maybe just do that from rep to rep, change that around. That'd be fair, Aston?
Yeah, yeah, and they can even do that on the runway as well. You know, I've had it done to me, and certainly I've seen other coaches do it, where the athlete looks away and the coach changes the marker on the runway, and the athlete's point then he still has to try and hit the board. Yeah, so you know, and the idea is you don't do huge changes, but you do small changes so that the athlete does have to use their eyes and make decisions without it being obvious on the runway. Yeah, I mean, but the thing about the, you know, I think it's the third point, the third bullet point, the consistency of the first 2 strides. I cannot stress that more than what's been said. You know, I actually go up to 506, to be perfectly honest. And it's important because that's where the runway for any of the jumps is going to be at its worst in terms of inconsistency. Once they're up and running into full flight, the irregularities are minuscule at that point. Yes, so a lot of the problem will come in those first 3 to 6 strides or so. So yeah.
Yeah. My check mark was my first stride. So I always, when I drove out, my first foot put down was always on that mark, and then that set me up. But cool. Okay, so in terms of training modalities, I think we could probably spend the whole presentation, another presentation, just looking at some of these elements. So that's perhaps beyond the scope of tonight. But I think it's just looking at how we develop those acceleration and upright right components. We look at it from 2 perspectives, from a technical and skill perspective, and then looking at it from a conditioning, physical biomotor ability perspective. So if we look at this, so we have an sample of activities that we could do that focuses around developing the acceleration components. So we look at wall drills. That's where the athlete's standing against the wall, braced out, and doing those acceleration exchanges. We see the high knee marches, high knee skips, and variations of them. Sledge pulls is a big favorite of mine. I like to do it in the same with hills. And I'll start the winter looking at acceleration runs on hills at a fairly steep height. And then after 6 weeks, 8 weeks of doing that, I'll move on to sledge pulls with various weight to look at different positions that we're looking to hit. But it's a great way to teach the movement and to execute and to get some development from a technical perspective there. And of course, acceleration runs themselves. And then from an upright position, we've got we talk about the MAC drills, the straight leg shuffles, which looks at the posterior chain and making sure we get that stiffness when we strike the ground, and then combinations of those drills above. We talk about wicket runs, and we've mentioned that previously. Dribbles, which we look at the path of the foot and that cyclical action, and again that can be varied due to range, either through the ankle, through the calf, through the knee, above the knee, and other activities like running with rope, cadence runs, sprint, float, sprint, hollow runs, in and outs. There's lots of different names for them, and of course run-up orientation, whether that's on the track or on the runway. So it's just a selection of activities we could do. We can maybe, if there's any questions around when you would use them and planning of them, yeah, we can go through that if there's any questions on that. So as I mentioned, so we look at the technical and skill piece. The next piece is really looking at the physical, the biomotor abilities of it. And again, we talk about the speed, strength, flexibility, coordination and stuff. So for me, is acceleration speed coupled with optimal approach speed, rhythm, coordination, technique, power, and elastic strength. These are all the qualities and attributes that we want to see in an athlete running down the runway. So how are we developing them? What I would like to do is introduce quickly the force-velocity relationship and the continuum of that, where we're certainly from developing the physical qualities. I like to what we call surf the curve, and develop and touch on each of those points along that curve at various times of the year. And again, the planning element of that is really depending on your philosophy and your planning approach. There's lots of different ways of stripping that down. But we can see at the left, we've got maximal strength on the left. So the heavier it is, the more force we're applied, the slower the velocity. And then at the other end, we've got speed and everything in between. So in terms of exercises, what does that look like? So we've got some traditional barbell lifts, which could be back squat, front squat. We have deadlifts, and if we're looking at an upper body example, could be bench press. The next continuum down, and again, this will really depend on the weight and the load that's on the bar. But Olympic lifts are in there, which are power clean. We could look at, so that's bilateral. We can look at unilateral and contralateral movements and step ups and lunges. But again, the movement, we can load these. The heavier we load them, the slower the movement. But what I must stress is this is all underpinned by movement efficiency and physical competency and the foundation movements. Next down, we've got weighted jumps, so that could be weighted with a weighted vest or with a barbell. And then we've got power snatch, which is typically a lighter load than clean, and therefore we see it slightly further down the curve. And then we've got your traditional medicine ball exercises, underarm throws, overhead throws, and horizontal bounce. The difference between horizontal bounce and the plyometrics, and I'm talking about more vertical component, is the ground contact times, where horizontal bounds are traditionally longer ground contact times than those that we would see perhaps in a drop jump or a depth jump. And that's kind of where I'm kind of illustrating that by less than 200 milliseconds. And then we've got some resisted sprints, which would be a percentage of the maximum resisted sled load that we would want to see. And again, depending on the load on that sled, that would then move further up the continuum if there's more weight. And then we've got sprinting and then assisted sprinting beyond that. So for me would be, and again, this is a continuum. So the exercises at the top of the curve there, towards a higher end, for me would be certainly focusing on it, would have a focus on acceleration, developing those acceleration components. Whereas the exercises from the vertical plyometrics and resisted sled sprinting and assisted sprinting would have a greater focus on developing maximum velocity. And again, from a planning perspective, it depends, I suppose, is the best way on that. Ashton, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think you said pretty much all that needs to be said. But you know, I mean, coaches are armed with some of this stuff, right? You know, you can't go wrong once you evaluate where your athletes are at. You know, if they need, if they need sorting out either at, the acceleration or the maximum speed end of things, you know exactly where to go to in the program and the type of activities that you should be doing to actually help that process. it's, I think this gives coach all that they require, all they need.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So now we've addressed that. The other kind of physical component or physiological component is looking at the sprinting and the administration of running. This is part of UKA's representation of looking at relative intensity and absolute intensity. And we can see here in orange that these exercises are competitive exercises and specific development exercises. So just some general guidance on these. So looking at training types for acceleration, and we're typically looking at between 10 and 40 meters and developing, working on that distance. We're not talking about full complete recoveries, but they're nearly complete, and we've got some indicative volumes. Again, it depends on your age and stage of your athlete, on all that kind of stuff. And then we've got resisted runs. Again, the volume could be slightly greater because the intensity would be slightly less, given that there's more load on it. So the intensity, the speed that you're running at, isn't going to be as high. In terms of planning these, certainly from my point of view, I'd probably want to be touching accelerating frequently through the week and throughout the whole season, whether it's part of your warm-up, potentiation activity leading into sprints, leading into jumps, leading into the gym work. For me, that's a steady feature in my programming. From absolute speed, and I'll kind of reference Boo Scheckschneider, who a lot of kind of my kind of theoretical concept stuff on jumps is based on is looking at this 3-second window, and so and that using that 3-second window, that's after we've accelerated. So we could be looking up to 7-8 seconds of sprinting. So what does that mean? So 7-8 seconds of sprinting could be up to 40 to 80 meters in sprinting, depending on the athlete. And again, we've got some indicative total volumes of sessions. And again, we're talking about achieving maximum velocity from accelerating up to 30-40 meters. But for speed work, if we're looking at running at 95% and above, absolute velocity, we're looking at full recoveries. So for example, if we're running sprints over 80 meters, above 95%, we'll be looking at either 1 minute per 10 meters or 1 minute per second sprinted as a rule of thumb. So I'd be looking at about 8 minutes recovery on that. And we talked about sprint, float, sprint, and ins and outs and hollows. There's lots of different variations on how we could do this. But in this version is accelerating hard for 40. We could be cruising for 10, hitting it hard for 20, and cruise for 20. Again, there's some guidance around that. And of course, in terms of developing absolute speed is the runway work that we can do within that. The note I've got there is avoid acceleration work with run-up due to the rhythm. And again, talking about some of the controlled acceleration that we want to see in that approach versus running hard and developing those acceleration qualities. We might just want to consider doing them on different sessions. But again, it's just probably a philosophical view rather than a hard rule. Speed endurance, I think, is really important. Developing that capacity as well to maintain those velocities down the runway. And again, my rule of thumb is up to 15 seconds of effort at 95% and above. And so anything between 80 meters and 150 meters, kind of the lower range for females and the upper range for males, just due to their ability to run that distance in that time. And again, certainly for looking at session administration and planning, if you're going to do some run-up work, you could have 6, 8, 10 runways in a session, and then you could maybe finish off that session with some speed endurance, which have a similar tempo and rhythm to it. And really finally, it's just looking at that metabolic support that's required to underpin all the running stuff, where you would see extensive tempo, definitely early season, early in the winter, followed by some intensive tempo within that to work on anaerobic power. Again, we've got sets and reps, indicative sets and reps and recovery there on that. Ashton, do you want to add anything there before we go to questions?
No. Again, right? That's pretty standard, yeah. And within reason, certainly right. I do exactly that you do. I have ratios. However long I run to this ratio, the rest would be and stuff like that. And we, and it's pretty similar. But certainly from a physiological point of view, certainly right. They'll tell you that minimum you're going to require maximum speed is 6 minutes minimum between reps. Yeah, so you can go for further than that. But yeah, you're saying what could be said. We got a couple of questions here. Don't know if you want to leave them to the end or whether we want to pick them up now.
Well, the next slide is this.
Okay, there you go.
But no, just if there's anything else you wanted to follow up on that, we can go to questions. So my apologies, that did go on a little bit longer, but hopefully we're able to cover some reasonable stuff there. Let's go with questions from Gasper. Do you contrast training work with your athletes along the force velocity continuum? So first something heavy, let's say lifts or jumps, and then normal jumps, run, or assist on top of that. If yes, which time of year? Do you want to go for that first, mate?
Yeah, well, I'll jump in there first. For me, it's reasonably simple. I think the potentiation stuff, which is kind of like what I think he's alluding to, is certainly stuff that I do, and there are ways to do that just for force in general to improve, to improve force. The way that I do it for sprinting is I don't go to the weights room. I use a sled. So I will run with a sled, or have the athlete run with a sled, and then follow that up with an acceleration sprint, and that is only to help to maximize force. So it doesn't help you on a maximum speed, but it helps you in the acceleration and drive.
Yeah,
that's basically what I do now.
Yeah. I've played quite a lot around with this, with my own, like for myself, and then with the athletes that I work with, and sometimes it'll be depending on the athlete, what they prefer and what the response I'm looking to get from the session as well. So in the power clean, for example, I used to lift heavy. I used to do a 1 rep in the power clean that was 98% of my 1 rep max. And then I would do one that's maybe 70, and then I would do 3 that's at 70%. So from a neuromuscular perspective, I've just lifted something very heavy and it's generally slow. And then I'm going in to lift something that's significantly lighter. And then from a neural perspective, I've got a huge stimulus, and I'll be able to generate more force and lift that bar quicker. So it's something I've played with, but that's towards the end of my career, and fairly well developed within that gym environment. It's not something I would do with developing athletes. I think there's certainly looking at that contrast is with more developed athletes. Ashton?
Yeah, no, I would certainly, I totally agree with you. I think there's a time and place for all of these things, right? And certainly, right, you wouldn't be doing it with necessarily a younger athlete. I'd wait until the athlete has actually gotten more or less what they can from normal general strength stroke power, maximum power type work, and use means like this one as a way of moving things on further into into their careers and stuff like that. But again, I was very much answering the question as it relates to speed, since we're talking about speed. It applies to other means as well, in terms of just general force, general power type work. But I'm going to stick with the velocity, or should I say with the speed concept, in that, what time of year you put this into the program depends on how you organize your program. Certainly so I'll give you an example from me. After my athletes are fit, literally, right, they will have a program that goes during the week. You're working on, you have 3 running sessions. 1 is on power, 1 is on maximum velocity, and 1 is on metabolic. Yeah, and so within that power stroke part of it, this is where this would fit for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and certainly when we're talking about run-up stuff, I liked potentiating running sessions with perhaps going into the gym, maybe doing a couple of light lifts. The athletes that I work with that like that environment, they get that stimulus, and then we go and transfer that stimulus into the track and use that as a component. So, but again, the guys it's probably before competition season, and they have to be fit for that. They have to be ready for that kind of condition.
Yeah.
So,
cool.
Oh, another one from Gasper. How much speed endurance work do you do with your jumpers, and do you keep it in throughout the season?
Okay, I'll jump in again. Not a lot. Yeah, I mean, most of the focus is on axle and max speed, with a smidgen of speed endurance, and that speed endurance will be more during preparation and less during competition. And literally the competition cycle will dictate how much of that work is done. So if they're jumping, once every 2 weeks, every week or something like that, you don't have a lot of time to put in that metabolic work. So you just get on what you can. But if you have maybe a break of 3 weeks between a competition, you might have a session, right, where you do a runway session, as Darren suggested earlier, and then right at the end of that session, you have a couple of runs over 120s.
Done. Yeah. When I use speed endurance, it would be pre-competition time. There's a big demand, mental and central neural system, and demand on that as well. So you wouldn't be doing lots of it, but again, it's something that you can build in. I actually ended up going down to 70 to 90 meters for the girls and focused on that, because after that period, the mechanics started to affect after that point, and therefore, kind of from a repetitive movement point of view, I wanted to keep the quality of the mechanics high, and so for them, we kept it within that distance and kept the speed up. So, yeah, cool. We've got a question. Can you send a copy of the PowerPoints, please? They will be available on Athletics Hub at the same time. So we've been uploading the presentations on Athletics Hub as well. So we get it there. Okay, next question from Darren Morrison. Great first name, mate. Really like it. With plyometrics bounding, is your program based on contacts or distance? If so, why?
Okay.
Aston, you can go for that one again.
Yeah. You can do both. Certainly, when I'm working with the younger athletes, I'll work on the number of contacts, because that's one way of keeping control of the loads and volume in the session very, very precisely. It also allows me to actually treat the contacts as, plyometrics is a strength exercise. Let's not get away from that. And because it's a strength exercise, then you treat it like a strength exercise. And if you're in the weights room, if you're doing things maximally, you wouldn't do that with more than 3, possibly 5, if you're working on power in a general sense. And so for things that I'm looking for quality and I'm looking for execution, then I will have 3 to 5 contacts possibly. But I can take it up to 10 if I want a little bit of volume and just work done within that, within that particular exercise. For the older athlete, who will then maybe is able to do their bounding over an extended period, then maybe I will go for distance. Yeah, because then that gives me a different kind of sense of what the volume can or can't be. Because for those guys, they can have contacts which can be 15, 20 contacts in any series of exercises that they do. And it's easier for me just to sort of say 20 meters, 30 meters, 40 meters, or whatever it is. But
Yeah.
either of those two means are good volume indicators.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because one, are you talking about volume load and measuring that, or are you talking about performance, you know, in terms of either ground contact times or distance covered through each kind of execution and repetition, and how does that then inform your program? You know, so from a bounding plyometrics point of view, there's a continuum in the same way there's a force velocity continuum. There's a continuum of, you know, in place jumps are you know, sit at the bottom of the continuum, and then you've got the shock depth jump plyometrics at the top end, and then there's elements in between, and then you've got your 2 foot contacts, and then your single foot contacts, which has different loads. So again, it's not as straightforward to kind of monitor that volume load from that perspective. What's your thoughts on that, Aston?
Because it is so complex. Yeah, depending on where you come from your plyometrics, I don't see a lot of difference between doing singles or doubles. I think you should do both. Yeah, I think some activities lend themselves well to both, and other activities can go singles. For me, if I ask an athlete to do a 3 contact bound, let's call it that, then I'm looking for maximal expression, really short contacts, yeah, and absolute everything in the explosion, because it's 3. If I'm asking for 8 contacts, then maybe I'm not expecting it to be so explosive, and I'm looking more for the technical application of how well the athlete keeps it together over that series of bounds or contacts or whatever it is. With the one exception, whenever you depth jumping, it's always maximal.
Yeah,
that's the only time I'll change on that one.
Yeah, and the numbers will be again 3 to 5 again. No
exactly
more than
that. Exactly that. Yes.
And,
so you never do depth jumps in 15s, for goodness sakes. Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, you know, you said it is a complex question actually. And that's probably another presentation.
Yeah, it almost takes. Yeah, you're going to need another webinar to talk about plyometrics.
Lining them up. Right, we've got our friend Dominic earlier mentioned about runway measurement. Does this require specialist equipment, perhaps only available at squad days? Can you say at this stage when such real-life camps might resume? If not, are there any plans for virtual training sessions for athletes mimicking squad days in some way?
Yeah, definitely yes, Darren.
Yes, Dominic, yes. I think we plan to do 3 squad days, weekends over this winter, but with COVID, the first date, we may not do face-to-face. We'll probably do something virtually, but more information on this will be sent out in due course. But yes, there's a question to that. Right, I think we've got this one being a question. Gasper, again, for training, you could maybe use simply a phone camera and calibrate it. You just need to accept the scenario. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, clock, speed gates, you know, yeah, it's still expensive though, but yeah. Okay.
Without naming any names, yeah. there are different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, I don't think we have any further questions unless anyone has anything they would like to pose just now. I think we can wrap it up there, mate.
Okay.
Aston, thank you very much for attending tonight. It's been great.
No, thanks very much, and some really good questions from people. I hope guys out there, you know, actually, you know, did sort of get what they were looking for from the session, and if not, right, get hold of us for goodness sakes, and ask some more.
Yeah, on that, so quick contact details are there. So I'm D Ritchie at englandathletics.org, and Aston is A Moore at britishathletics.org.uk. In terms of what's next, we're back next month looking at the penultimate and takeoff, and Frank, Atto, and myself will be looking at that. And then the one after that will be Aston and Frank looking at hop takeoff into the flight and the triple jump. We have one more regional network planned, which is going to take place on the 28th of September. If you're interested in chatting to our regional coach leads there, you can sign up via Athletics Hub. Yeah, and I think that's it. Listen, it's great. It's been thank you very much, guys, for attending and for listening in, and for some great questions tonight. Like Aston said, if there's anything that you want to pose, get in touch with us, and until next time, good night. Thank you.
Good night, guys. Good night.
Cheers.